Hello, friends, and welcome back to Market Shares. I am your host, Tony Blodgett, and today I want to talk a little bit about ADUs, Accessory Dwelling Units. And the reason I want to talk about this is, it's something that I'm actually quite excited about. We've talked about it a little bit on this podcast before. We had Anton Stetner on here, who's a good friend of mine that is a real estate agent. We talked about ADUs and the opportunity there, so we're going to touch on that a little bit. But I was reading an article today that there is a bipartisan bill that has been presented that it would address financing for ADUs. And this was Representative Sam Liccardo from California and Andrew Garbarino, I believe is how you say that, from New York. And it's called the Supporting Upgraded Property Project and Lending for Yards Act. And they're calling it the Supply Act, Supply Act. Now, this is very interesting because one of the challenges that so many people have with ADUs is the ability to finance them. I mean, unless you have a lot of equity in your property and you can just take out a home equity loan and use those funds to build them, there aren't a lot of great financing options that are targeted towards the actual building of an ADU that would take into consideration, the future appraised value of the property, kind of like the way that a construction loan would, right? Now, this article didn't go into a lot of detail on how these particular mortgages would be structured, but they did say they'd be second liens, so there'd be a second mortgage. And I would have to assume that they would take into consideration the future appraised value because otherwise you would just go get a normal second mortgage, right? But these would be federally backed second liens that would support the building of ADUs and detached ADUs. Now, the reason why this is such a big deal is because there is so much opportunity in the space for ADUs. Well, what do I mean by that? Well, look, I live here in the state of Washington, and in the state of Washington, there was a law passed that requires every municipality, starting with the larger ones, had to implement this more quickly. And then based on population, there was a staggered kind of timeline of implementation. But every municipality, every larger municipality is required by the state, by a state law, that they come up with higher density housing options. And this includes primarily what we call middle housing, which is the idea where you could build 4 to 6 to maybe 8 units on a regular residential lot. So we call these like a 6-pack, where it's like a 6-unit property on what might be, a 6,000 to 8,000 square foot lot. I don't know the exact requirements, but you get the point. You see a lot of these in other cities around the country where they're getting rid of an old home on a regular residential lot and then building a 6-plex. That happens a lot. That's the middle housing. And so that would be changing some of the zoning for what were historically residential neighborhoods and allowing more of this higher density multi-unit properties to be built there. The other solution is this idea of building a house in your backyard, right? These backyard cottages, as they're often referred to. And these will range anywhere from 600 to 800 square feet. Many of the laws that I've seen passed here in Washington State are 1,000 square feet inside of the city, where out in the county, you might see, 1,200, 1,250 square foot, which is, you'd be surprised at the floor plans that they can fit into 1,200 square feet. I mean, it's like a nice house. Matter of fact, I'm thinking back to the first home that I purchased in my early 20s, and it was, 1,350 square feet. That was a 2-story. That was a nice, 3-bedroom, 2.5 bath home. And you could build a house just a little bit smaller than that, that would house a whole family comfortably and really have it in your backyard. And so, I was very interested to see this bipartisan bill presented, and I think it's the first of many attempts to provide more financing options for these types of properties, because the popularity of them is just going to keep accelerating, in my opinion. And I think it's a great thing. I think it's a great thing for existing homeowners who want to be able to build equity in their home, maybe even create income generating property, on their current property. I think it's great for the growing number of multi-generational households that we see. We have both on both ends of the spectrum, right? You have aging parents oftentimes that you want, close in proximity, so you can have an ADU for your parents or vice versa. But you also have that younger generation that's having a more difficult time than ever, accessing home ownership. And this could be where maybe you build an ADU and then, they could live there. They might even be able to buy that home separately, in the future. It's also great for investors. It's great for builders. Essentially, many of the opportunities that I see here in Washington State are scenarios where you can literally buy a property, maybe it's an older home, but it's got a good sized lot. It can be in the city, and you can actually, in many cases, fit two ADUs or detached ADUs. So two small houses that you can build on that property. You can condoize that, and then you can sell those as individual units, creating more supply of houses for entry-level first-time home buyers. Or you can create those into rental properties for yourself, etc. I mean, the list goes on. So this provides the opportunity to essentially develop a piece of land with very minimal development costs, because you're not having to short plat or divide the property. You're really just, as long as you can fit within the setbacks, you're building these structures, you're condoizing it, and you now have these standalone structures that you can sell independent of each other. So this means that financing options to be able to purchase these ADUs, these small 2 to 3 unit condos, is essentially what they end up looking like, and financing to be able to build these, and et cetera, right? So I think that this is great to see as far as this particular Supply Act that we see coming through, but I think it's just the beginning of more liquidity targeted towards helping people with these ADUs. And if you're a homeowner or a potential buyer, this is something to be thinking about when you look at a property. I think the lens in which we view a property needs to shift, given the massive increase in availability of building these auxiliary dwelling units, because again, it can bring just value to the property in the future. It can give you opportunities to expand, the family members that might be, residing with you in a detached situation, or help you create income that can offset the mortgage payment on your home. Kind of like buying a multifamily property, but you don't have to live in a duplex. You can buy a nice home with a big backyard, build an ADU, and help supplement the mortgage payment that you might have. So these are all things that I think homeowners need to consider. I think that real estate agents need to really understand these rules and regulations in your cities, and make sure that you're not only advocating for your sellers, right? Because sometimes sellers don't even know that their property they're selling has this potential. So it's important for real estate agents to know what are the opportunities. If you primarily focus on listing properties, like advising your clients on the highest and best use of that property, but also on the other side, when you're working with buyers, helping them understand this property versus this property. If this one would allow for an ADU and this one doesn't, that might be a big decision factor if we're looking at similarly priced homes, but one literally has the ability to build another house on it, and this one doesn't. Just gives you a lot more options today and into the future. So this is exciting, you guys. we'll continue to keep an eye on things like this, but I just want to take this episode and talk about this Supply Act, but also remind everybody of the opportunity that's out there with ADUs. And it looks like there's going to be easier chances of getting financing in the future. I think in this article, they talked about there was over 1,000 submissions for permits, but many of them don't go anywhere once people realize what the cost is to build these. And they all have to be built pretty much out of pocket, out of savings, or within the current equity that you might have with a standard home equity loan, and people aren't able to put it together. Now, I do know that some renovation loans will allow you to build an ADU, but you got to talk to a really creative loan officer who understands these types of programs, and not everybody does, So having a good local based lender that knows your market is super important for all of your mortgage needs. But when it comes to DADUs and ADUs and these types of things, I think it's even more important. So look, guys, I appreciate your time and attention. Share this information. I think that your realtor friends, I think that, people that are looking to maybe buy their first home, they should at least have this on their radar and be thinking about, does finding a property that supports an auxiliary dwelling unit makes sense for me, and at least have that as something that you're considering as you go through the checklist of what's important to you when buying a home. So thank you guys for your time. Let people know about market shares. I would sure appreciate it. And if you haven't subscribed already, please do so that you don't miss our next episode, which will be out next Friday at 10 a.m. Pacific time. And until then, take care.